6 p.m. We have 5 of the council members here in council chambers, and we have Councilmember Jackson with us virtually. So I am calling us to order. I didn't pick up my gavel, so we're officially called to order. We are here tonight for a work session, but prior to that, I'm going to quickly have us do citizens' comments. We received one citizen comment from Ellen Tanner, who lives at 1911 Main Street. I believe she may have thought this was a normal council meeting, but because her citizen comment request is dated August 4th, I'm going to go ahead and read that. And her comment, I already said her address. Her comment is as follows. My comment is about the yellow speed bumps recently placed on Wilson Street between the railroad tracks and Cedar. My first comment is that it seems they have made walking on that stretch of Wilson more dangerous as cars move closer to the curb where people are walking to avoid riding over them. My second comment is please consider the optics of introducing what is supposed to be a safety measure and not continuing said measure on the north side of the tracks, which also has a lot of children and pedestrians. Is the city less concerned about the safety of those citizens? Question mark. So that is citizen comment. And council, I'm going to ask the city secretary to include that at the dais next Tuesday when we have our regular council meeting, because there may be some discussions about that. So we have completed item 3. Madam Secretary, you said that was the only citizen comment that we had? All right, great. So that gets us back to 2A, and the reason that we're here this evening, which is to consider action to approve resolution number R 2020-68, acknowledging proposed tax rate, no new revenue tax rate, and voter approval tax rate for fiscal year 2020-2021, fiscal year 2021, calling for a public hearing and authorizing public notices. It is wonderful to turn to our new City Manager Hoffman, and it's all yours.
There we go. Thank you, and it's wonderful to be here. And what's happening this evening was briefly described by Mr. Job at your workshop on July the 30th. The truth in taxation legislation requires that the city go through certain steps towards establishing a tax rate. We are not asking council to make any decisions tonight about establishing a tax rate, but as Trey described last Thursday to the city council, part of the process is to set a proposed rate for purposes of a public hearing that we are proposing be held on September the 8th. What we like to do next, if it's okay with council, is have CFO Tracy Waldron give a brief presentation on how the tax rate is calculated, how this compares to 2019 numbers, the difference between the proposed rate and the no new revenue rate, which is another requirement of state law. And all of this, again, is subject to final approval by the city council. And I'll also point out, and I think Tracy will cover this as well, the rate that we're actually recommending at this time is the same rate that Mr. Job described last Thursday, which is something less than the proposed rate. So there's a proposed rate that will be the subject of the public hearing notice, public hearing to be held on September the 8th. And that proposed rate is set at the maximum allowed by state law. And the thinking there is simply to give council some flexibility as you go through the budget process. And that maximum number is actually a bit higher than what we'll continue to recommend. And council will hear more about that when we formally present the recommended budget next Tuesday on August the 11th. Okay, so if that's okay, we'll ask Tracy to go through a few slides.
So a lot of these slides are going to look familiar, but they have changed slightly. We did get additional information on Friday, so we have updated those numbers. So let me go back over and I've changed some titles too. So the freeze adjusted taxable is what gets applied to the tax rate that we talk about. And the amount that's in parentheses was 955 million on Thursday. It's been adjusted a little bit due to some lawsuits that we had to include in our tax rate calculation. So that's the final number. And so there is a 1.7% increase between that adjusted 2019 taxable value and the taxable value that we're using for fiscal 2021. Any questions there?
Why did you change what you called it?
Because I wanted to be clear with what it is. It's the assessed values actually include the freeze properties. This particular taxable value is what you apply the rate to. The freezed properties actually that levy gets added to the amount that we calculate with the assessed values. And so I just wanted to get clarity on that.
Okay.
Ms. Weldon,
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about lawsuits, what do you?
There's property that's still under, they've gone into lawsuits and have not, so that does adjust those values that they're reporting for.
With the appraisal district, not with the city of Bastrop.
Correct. Yeah.
When council
They're
members hear
taxable
lawsuits,
property.
they think it's with
Yeah.
us, and that's
Yeah,
why.
our-
It's just that the properties with the appraised, I mean, they're still disputing their values.
So they filled out their paperwork and said, we're opposing the value. They've had their little, let's be friends, can we find a middle ground? And the property owner has said, we're not friends, we're not finding a middle ground, and I'm suing about the value you've given me.
Gotcha.
So the city of Bastrop has nothing to do with it, but that value that's involved in the lawsuit has to be acknowledged in a particular
Yes.
way. Is that
It does,
correct?
it affects our calculations in
Gotcha.
the worksheet.
Thank you.
Okay. So I did want to go back over these, and I've added a few more kind of definitions. So the no new revenue rate is basically generating the same revenue with the same properties from one year to the next. The voter approval tax rate is the maximum rate allowed by law without voter approval. And so I did want to clarify that the voter approval tax rate that we're working with is the 8% because council in an April 14th meeting, I believe, gave approval because of the disaster to go ahead and calculate the rates using the 8%. Normally, that would be a 3.5%.
Do we know what that number would have been at 3.5%?
It's in the next slide. It's pretty close to what we're projecting. So,
Okay, thank you.
and I also wanted to remind you that the 3.5% and the 8% is not on the total rate. Those are factors for the maintenance and operations rate. It excludes the debt rate when you're dealing with that increase.
So the no new revenue tax rate is the old effective rate.
Yes.
Thank you.
And the voter approval is basically your rollback rate. Mhm.
Gotcha.
So the proposed tax rate is the rate required to publish and hold public hearings. The adopted tax rate, the rate voted on and adopted, in our case, on September 8th. So those two rates can be different. The adopted rate cannot be more than the proposed tax rate, though, so keep that in mind. This slide has changed slightly. I want to confess I had some errors in my fiscal 2020 rates. So these are the corrected ones, and the ones that are actually written in the staff report are the corrected ones. So if you go back to the other PowerPoint I gave you on Thursday night, those rates might be slightly different.
Can we get this?
I asked
Email
for it
to
to go
us,
in
or-
your Dropbox.
Okay.
I think Colin's already sent it to Ann.
This
So
particular one, isn't it in our staff report?
do one.
This one is in our staff
So
report.
this information is.
Oh,
Yes. So I wanted to make sure that I'm doing kind of the difference between what we talked about on Thursday night and what our final numbers ended up being after we got the final information. So the no new tax rate is 3.5%. did go down slightly. It was 5688. Now the final number is 5656. The proposed tax rate, well, let me skip down. The voter approval tax rate was 5982. It went down slightly to 5961. No new M&O rate was 3735. Now it's 3715. So, Mayor, to answer your question, the proposed M&O rate, the original rate at 3869 was 3.6 over the no new revenue rate. I'm still getting used to these new names. So there's your 3.6%. We could have gone up to 8%. And so that's showing you the percentage. And the proposed M&O rate is 0.4012. So we're proposing that we publish a 5961 rate, which includes the 0.4 and the debt service, which is 0.949.
Because the 0.5818 didn't include INS, is that what you're saying? Of the chart before?
No, it
on
did.
Thursday?
No, it included the INS. But
0.5818, I don't think it included INS.
yes, it did. It was 0.3869 plus the 0.1949. That's what makes up the 5818.
So are we still at 5818 or not? Or you're saying that 5818 is now 5961?
So we want to talk about what we're going to propose in the budget.
Yes.
Versus
Okay.
what we're going to propose as a tax
So
rate.
the budget proposed rate's not on that document anywhere.
I'm going to get to it.
Okay, but I'm just,
Yeah.
we're saying that it's not on here yet. Okay.
Well, it was the proposed at Thursday meeting. Now that's changed to 5961. Okay. So going a little bit further, and I hope that I don't use too much of my accounting ease and someone might have to jump in and explain. I just wanted to be clear on how all of these rates are affecting the average homestead value. And I also wanted to clarify that bottom table right there is actually what the legislator is requiring that we put in the publication, and it can be very confusing. So if we're just looking at our average homestead value at 209 and we're applying last year's rate, if we're applying the 0.5818, that's $37 more. And if we're using the proposed at 5961, it's another $29. So if you were to go all the way up to the proposed, it would be $66. What the notice is making us do, or is putting it out there, which kind of muddies up, I feel like, the comparison, is that it's taking last year's homestead value and applying last year's rate. And then it's taking this year's homestead value and applying your proposed rate. So it's giving you the whole spectrum
because from a citizen standpoint, that's the check they wrote last year and the check they're going to write this
their
year.
value has changed.
Well, with the perspective of some values will go higher and some values will go lower. So it's an average home to an average home.
So the market rate from one year to the next didn't move. It's 213. The average homestead taxable value, there was a pretty large swing from the homestead exemptions. So basically,
you said average rate, but you mean average value. The average value was 213.
So the market value was 213 in both years.
And it stayed the same.
Didn't change. What changed was the homestead taxable value.
Because
last
you may
year
have had
it was
more people going to
205.
freeze or something.
This year it's 209. So I want to explain that $95. When I say, oh, it's only going to go up 66, but the notice says it's going to go up 95. So I just wanted us to talk about that so that when the notice hits, and if you get any questions, there's some clarity in how they're calculating these numbers.
So the 95 compares to the 66. What's the number compared to the 37? Which is the
Well,
budget rate at
no,
5818.
the 95 compares to last year's rate and all the way up to the proposed.
And I'm saying, so what's the budget rate of 0.5818 compared to last year in that same scenario? Because I understand you're saying there's a 95 compared to a 66,
Right.
and that's all the way up at the voter approval rate. And I'm saying, okay,
Somebody
so
with a calculator.
what would 37 compare to?
I think when I had the 5818 in there, I think about $65.
65?
But that's a guess. So anyway, I just wanted to explain what the notice is going to show because that's a requirement. And those notices were attached to your ordinance, so you know exactly what would be published in the newspaper. Any questions on this slide?
The homestead rate is done by the county, correct?
The exemptions are done through the appraisal district.
Right, but that's something the city does. So someone
Right.
asks
We don't
us,
have
that's
any
not-
control over
Right,
that.
I just want to make sure I was
That's
answering
right.
that correctly. If somebody asked me that's not our control. Okay,
No.
I just want to make sure I was answering it right.
Right. So our recommendation is that we propose the 0.5. I had 0.695. It's supposed to be 0.965. I'm dyslexic all of a sudden. Which is the highest rate the city can adopt without an election. And the distribution on that would be the 0.4 and the 0.9. That's just what makes up the 5961. Staff recommends and has built the budget based on the 5818. And the distribution on that would be the 0.3869 for M&O and the 0.949 for the INS. As I said before, the proposed rate doesn't have to be the final adopted rate. You just can't go over what was proposed. The additional revenue generated by the proposed tax rate over the recommended is the $141,000.
But the budget rate was 125,000
More. So the 141 is in addition to that.
in addition. Okay.
It's between that recommended and the proposed. And that's all I have as far as a presentation goes. If you have any questions.
Council? So fundamentally what I'm hearing the staff recommend is this, and I can't look up there because I'll say it wrong, but the 0.5961. We have to vote on something tonight, and it is literally what they're going to put in the paper and what we're going to tell people
be
is
on the
a proposed.
website.
It's going to be out there for everyone to see, but that is not the rate that we have to adopt by any stretch of the imagination. We can go down, but we can't go up. And so if the budget's been built on 0.5818, if we publish 0.5818 and we have 3 more workshops and we're like, oh man, if it was 0.5820, we could do these 3 other things. We couldn't do that if we publish 0.5818 tonight. So that's why it's the maximum flexibility. That's what staff's proposing. Staff can propose. They're trying to give us maximum flexibility, but you guys are the ones that vote. So that's kind of where we are. We can have a discussion, or somebody can make a motion, or what? Councilmember Peterson, were you getting ready to say something?
Yes, Mayor. I know staff's worked a lot on this, and as long as Tracy says we stayed within operating, because the city has to operate, I'm going to be satisfied with that. So I'll make a motion that this is what we put in the newspaper.
And to put the higher one in the
Yes.
newspaper?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a motion. I can have a second and we can talk about it.
A second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Ennis?
What was the rate we proposed last year? The 564? Was that the
Yes.
only thing we were dealing with?
Yes.
Is this a new requirement?
No.
So we felt so secure with our 564 last year that we didn't want to move. We didn't want to give ourselves room to.
I mean, I can't really answer that. I know that in the last 5 years, we have put a higher rate as a proposed and actually adopted a lower rate just because we understood that you can't go up, but you can come down. Because I know one of the years we posted a 576 and ended up still doing the 564. So
I think it's a no-brainer that to kind of third Councilman Peterson and Councilmember Rogers' motions to go to the 5961. But it's all how we tell our story when it comes to the newspaper and everything else. You have to publish it in a certain way, but I think we need to make sure that we're telling our story the way we want it to be told.
Yeah, I understand. So we'll be clarifying and I'm sure that our city manager Hoffman will help us with that. That it makes sure that what council's voting on and what we are taking forward is a rate that to be considered. We are by no means we are not finalizing the rate. We are not finalizing the budget. One of the things from my perspective that's changed so much from last year was this no new revenue rate is higher than what the rate that we had last year to generate the same amount property, and we've never been that way before. Before the whether it's no new revenue or the effective rate, because some of us have spent several years with the effective rate, that was usually a lower number. The rollback rate was a higher number, and we were always kind of right there in the middle, and coincidentally also at exactly the same rate. So there weren't quite as many moving parts. So I think that's part of why we're finding ourselves having a somewhat of an unusual conversation. But that, for me, that's the biggest difference. Normally you keep it that same rate. There's a marginal amount of additional revenue. It's a very minimal amount that's added to the homeowner, and that's just not how the facts are working out this time around.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No.
Go for it.
I was going to ask her to go back a slide. So finish your
I was
thoughts.
just going to. I know we've talked about it.
How did that happen?
How is this particular circumstance happen? I mean, we had the protests, which dropped some of our values. That's part of it, right?
Right.
Is there some other?
There was also some reclassification. So there was like $7 million in value that got moved to freeze during the time, from the time we got the reports last year to the time they gave us the same year reports this year, there was $7 million added to freeze value. So there's all of these. Basically what the appraisal district told me was that they have up to 3 years to claim their exemption, as long as they were eligible. And so there's just a lot of movement in those numbers. But we felt comfortable with the 80% last year. We've used 80% for as long as I've been doing your tax rate calculations. And last year it just didn't work.
That's a really good point. Your house has a value the day you're eligible for the exemption. You may not go file the paperwork, and when you do, it goes back to the value it was the day you turned 8. So some of these people may be going back 3 years. And they talk to each other, and then everybody in that neighborhood's like, oh, you mean I was supposed to file my paperwork? And it can kind of generate its own little network.
Going back to my city manager, going back to my comment a while ago, I think this is important stuff. I don't know how we get it out, but I think it's important that we, when the story gets told, that this kind of information's in it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Councilmember Rogers, I think you
Yes,
have.
ma'am. Tracy, if you don't mind, go back to how much it was going to cost the normal citizen screen that you had. Oh, I was looking at the top screen. Yeah, that one. So the bottom, it would be the 37 plus the 29 if we adopted
All the
the
way up to
proposed.
the
And then it
proposed.
would, if we went with what we're thinking the budget's going to be, it's the 37.
Right.
Okay, I just want to make sure I had my numbers.
And I did do the math on the bottom part. If it wasn't the 5963, but the 5818, it was $60.
$60. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I had my numbers right on my page there. Which
So
one?
if we were to go to the voter approval, the rollback, the 8%, the whole enchilada, the numbers of my house was worth 209,000 last year, my house is worth 209,000 this year, the number would be 66. If you do the legislative method that says my house was worth a lower number last year at a rate, and now this year it's 209,000 at the higher rate, that's how you get to the 95.
Yes.
And the truth is, this calculation literally needs to be done by every single property, because some properties have gone up a little, some properties have gone up maybe a bunch, some properties may have frozen.
Filed for
So
their exemption, and now it went down.
yeah, there's literally every single piece of property is going to tell its own story. So, Councilmember Ennis, to your point of how important it is that we get the facts out about the story, the only way it's 37 is if your house is worth $209,000. So if
Okay.
your house is worth considerably less or considerably more, your number's going to be different. So there, with the exemptions and when you got the exemption, and there, if you're in a ESD, there's just all kinds of things that can impact your total property bill. And this is, in my opinion, this is a really good time to remind folks that when they get their little love note from the appraisal district of what their property tax is going to be, please take time to note that the city of Bastrop line is probably going to be about 27% of your total number. It's not the whole bill. So we're talking about one line item on that property tax bill. So I have a motion. I have a second. I can't see Councilmember Jackson, and Mayor Pro Tem Nelson, you haven't spoken. Is there any words of wisdom you'd like to share before we vote?
Well, I think it's important for us to continue to remember that we're setting some parameters for which staff to work under to provide us the budget based upon the priorities that are in play here. I like the fact that we're setting it up at the higher rate, which we should do, to allow them the fence within which to work. So I'm in complete agreement with the Councilmember Peterson on this.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson. Councilmember Jackson, would you like to make any comments?
I'd just like to say that I think what staff has recommended is ideal because it does give us some flexibility as we're going through the future workshops to stay within the rate, and we have flexibility there. So I'm in agreement with the motion and staff's recommendation.
It's also worth noting that we feel confident that the verbiage in Senate Bill 2 allows us to go to 8% during the declaration, but there is not universal agreement on that little tidbit of information, which was why I was asking the budget rate of 0.581. If it's fairly close to the 3.5, that may ultimately prove long-term important to us. We have no idea what the legislators will do in January of next year, but they have mentioned that there will be payback to any city that takes advantage of that option that they have from the emergency. So we just, we got to understand the playing field that we're on.
Haven't we been given the authority to do that? By
Yes,
emergency.
but there has not been a formal lawsuit, and judges haven't weighed into that. So imagine this, different lawyers have different opinions.
Gotcha.
Okay, I have a motion, a second. We've had full discussion. Madam Secretary, if you will call the roll.
Councilmember Peterson,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson,
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously. Staff will move forward with posting the potential tax rate, and we will have many more discussions about that. That brings us to item number 4. Councilmember Peterson.
Mayor, council, city manager, I make a motion to adjourn.
It is 6:30 and we are adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, public, and thank you, City Manager Hoffman and staff. Appreciate
Council.
everyone's hard work.